Are you frustrated about your music career? Well, chances are you're not alone. This is day 2 of me exposing the music industry day at a time. And today I'm going to expose how deep the criminal element is involved with music in the music industry. It basically started with criminal activity. So, what we're going to do is go to the source. This is a fellow, former, I should say, mafia member here, Michael Franzese. He's going to explain the mafia's involvement in the music industry. The reason this is important because now you're getting it from the source and there's no questioning about it. Okay, so we're going to start and I'm going to comment as we go.
Action. So it was a good week. And today we're going to do part 2 of the mob's infiltration into the music industry. And we had part 1 on Tuesday, got great responses. Thank you very much. And we're going to do part 2.
So if you don't know, he basically does public speaking now and he's really trying to help people and show how he used to live, but now he's trying to tell stories and help people to move them closer to their goals and different things legitimately.
Today. And I got to talk to you today about Morris Levy. Morris Levy, another Jewish guy who is...
I'm going to pause here. Who runs the music industry? That's the question for the day. Leave a comment below. Who do you think runs the music industry?
Extremely influential in the music industry back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. As a matter of fact, his reach was so extensive that Variety magazine called him the octopus. Because
now he's going to talk about how even though he wasn't in the industry, he still had a reach within the industry. And that's kind of how BusyWorks Beats is. I'm not in the industry because I'm not controlled by those entities, but I can still move in and out when I want to.
His reach, in accordance with the role that he played. He wasn't, one of the major labels. He had his own label, Roulette Records, but his reach in the industry was so extensive, they called him the octopus. And again, I got to say, another Jewish guy. Morris was Jewish, obviously. And just like Meyer Lansky and Arnold Rothstein and Bugsy Siegel, he played a huge role in organized crime, in the mob and La Cosa Nostra here in America.
Now, most people think the mob was just Cosa Nostra. It's also a lot of affiliates that work with those organizations. This is not a criminal breakdown video. It's just to understand the sources and the start to the music industry so you understand the dynamics of how it evolved over time from physical CDs and tapes and distribution and why that was so important that they had criminal element to that because they control logistics, they control distribution, and they controlled the enforcement behind that, as well as now moving into the digital world. How do we translate those old models into the digital world? And don't think it has stopped at just physical goods and CDs.
America. And we had a great relationship with a lot of Jewish guys. They were very smart and they were gangsters at heart, no question about it. And
he just said it. Just because they're not from his tribe of folks doesn't mean they're not acting hardcore
and
in the
Morris
industry.
Levy happened to be one of them. So he had a record label called Roulette Records, and he was mobbed up. He had an association with a guy by the name of Tommy Eberly, who was at one time the boss of the Genovese family. He later got involved with the Chin, was very close to him. He had a lot of dealings.
So let me pause it here. It's similar to subsidiary record labels, how there's 3 main record labels at the top: Universal Music, Warner Music, and then you have Sony. There's a lot of subsidiary companies under those 3 companies, which basically form like the monopoly, the same way Google is basically at the top, Microsoft, Apple. There's certain companies at the top. And there's other companies underneath them that support those 3 companies for the most part. So again, Universal, Warner, Sony, and then all the subsidiaries that you guys understand, the Interscopes, the imprints they call them, the Interscopes, the Def Jams, the so-and-sos. Okay, Warner Chappell, all those are subsidiaries under a bigger umbrella. And that's where a lot of this activity tends to happen. So that association to the bigger corporation at the top is what creates this network effect that he's talking about.
With Tommy Vastola, Corky they called him. He was a soldier, later a capo with the DeCavalcante family. These were all influential guys, and Morris Levy was hooked up with all of them. My father had some involvement with him. Very influential guy. But anyway, he had a record label called Roulette Records.
Okay, and I want to pause it here. He just said how this dude was tied up with certain people and networks, and then he says he has a record label. So if you really think that the criminal activity died out when CDs shifted to digital, you're living a fantasy. Okay, and I'm saying this video not to discourage you, but to show you that the game you're playing may be legit, but the game everybody else is playing is not necessarily legit. So when you compare yourself to people who are not playing the same game, it's always going to make you feel lesser than. It's always going to make you feel self-conscious because you're looking at people who are using techniques and stuff that aren't ethical, that aren't legal, and that aren't, kosher, so to speak.
Couple of different things that he would do. A couple of different scams that he pulled that netted him, hundreds of millions of dollars. He was really, really a heavyweight. He also had a chain of stores called Strawberry Records that he owned.
Very important, he says this. He had a chain of stores. What do you need stores to do back in the days when CDs were popular? Distribution. So if not only do you own the artist, you own their copyrights and the masters, you print that onto a CD with copying copyrights. Okay, you copy the CD over and over and over again. So then the stores go to buy the CD and then the stores sell it to the consumer at the end of the day, or at least that's what they report. Okay, so when you own the whole supply chain from top to bottom, that leaves a lot of wiggle room for these companies to do a lot of the foul stuff that he's about to talk about.
I believe there were 60, 70, maybe 80 stores at that time. And a couple of scams that he was able to pull off quite successfully with the help of his organized crime connections. One major one that he pulled off, I'll never forget, and I'd learned about this, from my dad and from my involvement in the record business, which wasn't nearly as extensive as his. But he would have a scam where he would pirate the masters of some major artists. He would pirate the masters.
Okay, let's pause it here because I have to make comments as we go. So pirating the masters back then, I'm trying to look around. Do I have something that's similar to? Don't have anything that's similar to the size that I could pick up easily. So real quick, like, imagine this. I don't know if it will reach. Darn, it won't reach. Okay, imagine, a cassette tape, like a VHS, right, that your parents may have still in their house from the 90s. Now imagine like the size of two VHSs side to side. That was how stuff was stored on reel. So you would have to literally have a physical reel, a duplicate, the same way they used to move the movie reels from the studios to the movie theater. Okay, and they had to make sure that it was secure, because if it wasn't secure, you'd have people pirating, copying the reel, and stealing the reels and selling them to the black market for big money. So you had to have a trusted logistics team to not only make a movie in Hollywood, you had to then have it securely shipped from the Hollywood studio as a reel, which is just this long thing of tape. Okay. And then you would have to have it travel to the different movie theaters securely. So the same thing. Let me just quickly make this anecdote. Video games, the way they got leaked and how people play them weeks ahead of time is because you had trucks who delivered the video games to all the GameStops around the world. And then there would be employees who were kind of scandalous, and they would take some of those copies. Some of the managers would take some of the copies off the truck and then take them home, or sell them, or whatever they would do. And they would make content and have the game way before anybody else had the game, because the game had to be in the stores before the launch of the game. So those games were shipped in weeks ahead of time sometimes, so that by June 15th, this game's going to come out. Basically, they're going to take the game from the back of the store to the front of the store, but it's been there. Okay, so the same thing here. Okay, I don't want to keep going on and on and on.
He would duplicate these.
My point is, they would take the masters or the music that's stored usually as a reel back in the day, or a CD or whatever they copied it onto. They would take that, they would copy it in different methods. Okay, so now they have a duplicate of the original seed, and now they're going to create their own strain.
Masters, and he would fill the retail stores with them at a lower price than.
Now, how could he fill the retail stores? One, he had, if he's speaking about the same person, he had his own storefront. Okay, so now on top of his own storefront, to create the piracy, again, taking the masters, putting it through your own supply chain and distributing at a cheaper price, taking basically all the revenue from the CDs because they had early copies of it. Okay, and they can also go to other stores and say, here, you want to buy in bulk? We have 10,000, that's probably a lot. We have 1,000 copies of X, Y, and Z artist's new album. You can buy 1,000 right now for $1. Whereas, buying it from the record label salesman could be $10 an album, or $5. I don't know the exact wholesale price, but they would sell it at much cheaper, so that the record labels couldn't even compete to get their own album into the stores. So this is what he's talking about.
The record labels, the big labels, would sell them to the stores. So these records were selling extensively. They were his records. He was getting the revenue. The major labels were getting nothing, and the artists were getting beat out of their royalties.
Okay, now what I'm trying to translate this for you at home is to say that if people think that this mentality stopped just because we went digital, you're really mistaking yourself. Okay, so the way they do this nowadays, they don't ship CDs to stores and have distribution like that. What they do nowadays is the bot game. Okay, so they'll tell you to join a Spotify, put your music on Spotify. What does Spotify gain from you joining? All of your audience. Okay, because you're going to tell all your people to go to Spotify to listen to your music. Spotify now has at least 100 new accounts on um, their platform. Now they can go to investors because it's a public company. They can go to investors and say, "Hey, we just got 1 million new subscribers in the last month. This valuates the company at 10 billion." Okay, and that's how they get money out of you bringing your energy to the platform simply by making users. They can go capitalize that in the markets with stocks. Okay, whereas you can't do that. And the difference is you're sending all the people to Spotify. Doesn't mean your record's going to sell. They own all the emails, they own all the contact information and all the data from the people you send to Spotify. You don't even have control over that. And then secondly, when you put your music on these platforms to stream, you're organically sending thousands of people to the platform. Okay, that's great. Now, what happens is those people continue to stay on Spotify and then go to other artists. So you're essentially sending your audience to your competition. Now, on top of that, the way the algorithm works on Spotify is based on activities, engagements, plays, all that type of stuff, parameters that we don't even know. But what happens is these major artists will use these bot farms. They'll go in, they'll pump up their streams to where it looks like they're the hottest new artist, so that right after the person listens to your record, it then goes to the next hottest artist who was using bots right after your record. And then they get paid your potential stream income. Now, how it works on the back end, from what I understand, is that if everybody's paying a monthly fee, let me go big cam. I realize this, I'm going in about this. Is if everybody's paying a monthly fee to Spotify, for example, let's say $9.99. Now, what can $9.99 get you in the old world of buying CDs? That's maybe one CD, maybe a month. Okay, now do you listen to one CD a month? No, you listen to tons of music. Now, the streaming rates are 0.000 something something cents. So that means in order to get to $9.99 every month, I would have to stream probably 20,000 records plus a month. That's like 10,000 records a day. I don't know the math on that because I didn't do the math. Okay, but you would have to stream an extreme amount for 24 hours straight, days and days and days, to even equal the value of the $9.99. So what I'm saying is you're paying these streaming companies, okay, and they're paying the artist pennies on pennies on pennies on pennies on pennies of the dollar. Okay, getting zero of that value because they know that you're only going to stream maybe 20 songs a month, 30 songs a month. Now, all that excess goes to Spotify. It does not go to the artist. It goes into this pool of money, from what I understand. Okay, the subscriber cash. And then that's how they start paying out some of the top artists on the platform. And so all I'm saying is that the more people that are independent or wherever you're from and you're driving people to a platform like Spotify, because you're doing the organic thing, you're not tapping into this other pool of income. Okay, so let's switch over back to the video because I don't want to make this about Spotify, more so about the mentality that is still existing.
Now, the artists, okay, of course, would go into the stores and they'd see these records flying off the shelves, and they would go back to the labels and say, hey, we see these stores stacked with our records, and yet we're not getting the royalties. What's going on? So the big labels, they do their investigation. They find out that there's counterfeit records going into the stores at a cheaper price. So who do they call? They call Morris.
Okay, I want to pause it there. How would a major label do an investigation to figure out what's happening to the royalties? It's because they have ties to the underworld. The underworld told them that, oh, this person's doing this. How else would you know that your records are being counterfeited? You would literally have to go to every store that your CDs are distributed to and figure out how it got even copied. And how would you even know it got copied? You would have to scan it for yourself and do all these different systems.
Morris Levy. They say, Morris, we got this problem. These record companies, they're selling counterfeit records. Our artists are not getting the royalties, and we're getting beat out of revenue. Can you help us? And Morris would say, of course, I can help you.
Because the conversation, sorry to pause it here, would be, okay, you go to, let's say you went to 20 record stores and you're like, hey guys, where's my royalties? They go, oh, I bought my stuff from this guy, Todd. And they go, Todd, who's Todd? Oh, Todd is so-and-so tied to so-and-so tied to so-and-so. That's what I mean by this mentality, and the personality did not leave the music industry.
It's going to cost you X amount of dollars. He would charge them hundreds of thousands of dollars to put a stop to those counterfeit records going into those stores. And who?
Okay, so again, who in the right mind would go, hey, a person who just came up to our record label, you claim you can stop all these fraudulent things? It's because they know they have underworld ties, for one, or two, they know that it's the person doing it and they're willing to pay the extortion fee to get their stuff back because they're willing to take a smaller margin and give the other person whatever the margin would be. Okay, so that's what's happening.
Who did he put a stop on? Himself, because he was the one that was doing it.
It's called
So he
buying
would
out your
stop them,
competition.
and he would actually then start doing again with another label in another company. He formed like a daisy chain of companies to continue to pull this scam on the major record labels. And I'm talking about, this is big money. This is huge money. So
Now, again, if you guys don't think that this still exists in music, you are very mistaken. I said it before. They pay you 0.00004 for your streams. Okay, so where's the other 9.99 go to? Okay, it goes to a pool of money that Spotify owns. Now, depending on how their politics work, I don't know if they create a pool of money for the top creators on the platform and pay out that way. I don't know. There's something that people talk about called a black box. But you have to ask, where does all that other money go on these platforms?
But he pulled that quite successfully for quite some time. And of course, who was going to mess with him? They all knew his organized crime involvement. Nobody would mess with him. It was better for the record companies to pay him, and they did, the major labels. Another thing that the mob was quite involved in at that time was something called payola. Now, you might be
All right,
familiar.
here's a funny story. It's kind of funny, but it's short. I was talking to this person who was like a tour manager slash promoter out in like New Jersey and Philadelphia area. And I was just talking about music, just talking about how it's cool to see him with all these legacy acts from the 90s and 80s. And then I mentioned something about payola, and he was like, yo, he was like, what you say? He was like, don't ever say that word. He's like, I don't want you to ever say that. He's like, we never talk about that. We don't even bring it up. And he got really defensive because I used the word payola. I was like, why? In my head, I'm going, why is he so defensive? Oh, because that's the whole money scheme of the whole promoters and tour managing and radio. It's because I think he'll get to it. So I don't want to like jump too far ahead. But basically, payola is the version of paying a DJ, for example, to play your song. Now, when it gets into radio, there's different laws on how much should be paid to an artist and all that. We're not going to get into the legalities of it, but the short end of it is that you're paying an influencer who doesn't disclose that they were paid to promote a product, and that's against FTC regulations when it comes to endorsements. So if I go to New York, find a DJ to play my record, I give him 20,000 out of my duffel bag, and he doesn't tell the audience, okay? And then he inorganically plays my record. One, it's going to feel like that artist earned their spot on radio, for one. Two, radio works by the listeners voting for who they want to hear. Okay, so if this person's on the radio, people who are listening in assume that, oh, we want to hear this person because everybody else voted for them. So it creates this fake social proof effect, which then ties that person into the radio syndicate, which is now owned by companies like iHeart and different things who can syndicate all these songs around the US without even going to a bunch of DJ stations. They basically have the same program throughout all these different radio stations. And program directors are just basically making sure that they're in line with the syndication. Okay, so I'm gonna let him speak for it because there's a lot to get into.
With that term.
But the point is, payola is like the dude made me not even mention it, even though it happens.
But just so you know, it's illegal for anyone, whether it be an artist, a record label, an independent agent, to pay a DJ to push somebody's record to the top and give it more play. You can't do that, okay, unless you disclose
because
the fact
money's
that somebody's
involved.
Paying you to do that. Because the more airplay that a record gets, normally the better the sales.
See?
So it was
because the sales. So it's okay. So there's so much to tell you guys, but I'll leave my
common
thoughts for later.
practice. Organized crime guys would do it all the time. Morris Levy was the king of this, where he would be paying DJs under the table to push his artist label.
Let me just say this right now before I forget. Okay, so payola isn't only just somebody coming up with a duffel bag of 20,000, giving it to a DJ in New York, and then the New York media DJ playing it across all the radio stations. That's not really. That's the old-fashioned way of doing that. And I mean, I can't say it doesn't happen because we've seen the story of BMF. We've seen the story of Blood Money. We've seen all the kind of hip-hop storylines when it comes to paying street cash for some legitimate business. But also, you guys got to remember, when these radio stations give out, okay, who wants to win $1,000 of free gas for the week? Where do you think that $1,000 comes from? Where do you think the free cars come from? Where do you think the free merch that they give out comes from? It comes from people who are paying in kind with these record labels, or excuse me, with these radio station hosts and different things, so that they have an incentive to give to their audience, and it's basically paying indirectly for that person to get recognized.
And he had a lot of big artists
And
at the
don't even
time.
let me get started on free concerts. How do you think these artists perform? You think they do it for free? They don't do it for free.
I mean, Sammy Davis, Tommy James, Pearl Bailey, you name it, all the big artists in the 60s, many of them, I should say, were signed to Roulette Records. And he made a ton of money in that regard. So payola was big. A lot of people were indicted on that at various times. It's illegal to do that. It's only legal if you disclose the fact that you're paying the DJ, but they don't want to do that. When
Again,
somebody
why wouldn't somebody say, "Hey, I paid this DJ $20,000 to play my record"? Because it doesn't feel like the people voted for that person to be on the radio. It doesn't feel like we're discovering a new act. It just feels like we're being sold to. And when you dissolve that illusion, music isn't the same.
hears that they're paying somebody
That's
to
one reason why the music industry is so valued in America. It can't be compromised with money. You can have billionaire oligarchs, billionaire Russian oligarchs in Miami pay millions of dollars to a new artist. It doesn't mean that artist is going to win in the music industry. That's the one thing that's keeping this music industry alive, is that it can't be bought as far as straight up cash. The culture is what drives music. We all know and have good taste.
push the
I
record.
shouldn't say we
Well,
all, but I'm saying we have taste as humans, and you can't buy taste.
that kind of taints the record. Nobody's going to buy it. So they would never disclose it. So payola was huge. And even the big labels were involved in this in some way. They were hiring guys under the table to pay the DJs at the time. There was
Boom, 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 boom. If the record label doesn't want to be the fall guy, they'll send out a little soldier, the little pawn on the chessboard, and that soldier will hand the duffel bag over to that DJ. What did I forget who said, some person who was in the street said this. He said, "Don't worry about the man you see. Worry about the man you don't see, because that's the one getting money." Think about Sosa from Scarface. He's on an island. He's away from everything, but he's the kingpin because he distributes and moves the quantity of the work. He doesn't touch the work. He just takes the farm or wherever the work came from and distributes it out to all his little block soldiers that stand on the corner from 9 to 5, and then try to pitch it. They have the highest risk. Sosa's on an island chilling with less risk because he gets further and further away from the actual transaction. Whereas the person who does the hand-to-hand transaction has the highest risk, but they take some of the reward as far as cash. But I could digress.
big case, I think, with Alan Freed, who was a huge DJ at the time out of Cleveland and New York. He was involved in some payola scam at the time. So that's one thing that Morris Levy was heavily involved in.
Again, the whole goal for me
Publishing.
showing you this.
For those of you that
wait,
are
let me
not,
pause it here. The whole goal for me showing you this is that you need to understand that criminal mindset and activity did not stop when CDs transferred to digital. And again, when you're trying to compete against stuff that isn't legit, you're always going to be beating yourself up in the mind. I don't want you to beat yourself up anymore. I just want you to acknowledge that certain people in the industry use bots. Certain people in the industry use illegitimate means to get on those stages. It's not all about quality and quantity and talent that got that person there. So stop comparing yourself to these people who use different means.
publishing. For
Publishing.
those of you that are not involved in the record business or don't understand it at all, publishing is where all the money is. You write the song,
What is publishing? It's when I write a song. Oh, he's about to explain it actually.
you make the money. Every time that song is played by anybody at any time, AppScan, BMI, they keep a record of it, and you get paid.
Okay, so what's important to say here too is that publishing is seen almost like a mortgage, how it's paid monthly. Okay, to you, I'm saying. Okay, so that monthly revenue is not only important to the artist, but also investors who go to buy up catalogs and buy up future income. Okay, it's also important to the streets. Why? Because the streets have charges on them. They have felonies, they have whatever on their record, and they can't do legitimate business in certain degrees. They're banned from doing certain business. So what do they rely on? The music industry to pull in that publishing check, because that's their way of making income without being in the system, so to speak. So he's going to pull up another example of how the streets kind of tie their way into publishing.
I'll tell you what Morris used to do. He used to fraudulently put his name as one of the writers, one of the songwriters, and he would keep all the publishing. He beat a lot of his artists that way.
Okay,
And they were
boom, 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 boom. You've heard this many a time where instead of just getting a producer credit on a record, which caps out at a certain percentage, they'll add these people as writers on a record, and the writers are entitled to more percentage. So you have people basically taxing it like street draft to all these artists because again, that's their pseudo way of extorting them is saying that put me on as a writer. It's not a choice. If you want this record to come out and you want to be successful, you want to work at this venue that we control that block with. Remember that the ultimate game for music is to take music that you record in a studio, get it streamed so that you have live events. It's where the most of the money's made in music is live events. What happens if, X, Y, and Z gang runs that whole territory and you have to perform in that territory? Guess what? You have to check in with that person. You have to probably pay some type of draft when it comes to hip hop, meaning that you have to dish a cut to the territory because you're on their territory. If you want to perform that night and you don't want it to get shot up, you don't want to have problems getting out in and out the venue, guess what? They have to pay up to those different people in those organized crime syndicates. Okay. And the way they do that without having an issue is he's saying it right here is add them as writers on their publishing so that that's their tax to the organization so that they don't get hassled.
They were afraid to say anything because it was Morris. They knew his connections. They didn't want to say anything. He made millions in publishing, millions in publishing by, again, fraudulently saying that he was one of the writers of the songs.
That happens all the time.
And then cutouts was another thing. He would stamp out records illegally, and he would put them in the stores. In his record store, his retail outlet, Strawberry Records, just about every record in any one of those stores, they were fraudulent. I mean, he would take some.
Now, who would know back in the day what's a legitimate 50 Cent record and what's not? They just see a cover, it's wrapped in plastic, they buy it. Same thing goes with streaming. It's like, how do you know that? Now, this is why AI is going to be a problem, is how do you know that that's the actual artist? Now, features, how do you know that's a real feature? There's so many.
From the labels, obviously, but he would put a lot of his own cutouts at there. He would grab the master, he would make a cutout of it, he would sell it to the store for less than what the major labels were selling their record for, and he would get all the revenue. So, things like that. And, I had a little bit of a relationship with somebody that was a bodyguard to Morris Levy, good guy. His name was Nate McCullough. And he was involved in the industry also, but a really good guy. And he got in some trouble with Morris and with a couple of guys that thought he was going to turn snitch.
That's part of the story I don't remember.
In 1980, he was murdered, and they say that Morris Levy was behind this. And by the way, Morris Levy died in 1990, so I'm not saying anything out of school. The guy can't get in trouble for it. And I think a lot of this information is known. My dad had a couple of run-ins with Morris Levy.
So again, remember, this is the person who was the octopus, not in the industry, but can talk to anybody in the industry, still had connections to the dark side of the world, the dark world of the industry, and then got tied up in some street stuff. This is what I'm saying. It's the industry that you're sold is a fantasy because they want you to actually bring the real value to those companies so that those companies can capitalize in the different markets like the stock market.
And as a result, he had sit-downs with Vastola and he had sit-downs with Tommy Eberly at the time over that. But my father did get along, and he never had, to worry about Morris Levy again, interfering in any of Buddha Kama Sutra Records, which was my father's label. So, but Mo Levy was really a force in that business, no doubt. In the mid-'80s, I believe that Morris was indicted several times, to my knowledge. I think in the mid-'80s he was indicted on a
I'm going to kind of skip ahead because
the law got involved, and Morris was indicted for that. 90 and just before. I had extensive involvement in that. A lot of my associates also did. And of course, we got close with many of the artists. There's a big story. There's always stories out there about Frank Sinatra's involvement with the mob.
Frank Sinatra, one of the first most influential artists in the new, I'll say new, meaning like the new genesis of the music industry. And it was so heavily mob tied. This is what, like, you guys really got to understand. You're chasing artists on this level who are doing a lot of things that you don't understand. And then when you get done bad business, you come running back to the internet screaming, and nothing's ever going to be done correctly because it's built off of twisted, distorted reality to begin with.
And of course, Frank Sinatra was a friend, to many mob guys. My father knew him well. Joe Colombo knew him well.
And imagine how many people are selling beats right now. You don't even know how much money came from the streets, but you're still taking the money.
And all of that. And of course, the deal that Frank Sinatra acted as a liaison between John Kennedy and the mob and Joe.
So I'm going to end this here because there's only like a minute left on that video. I want to thank Michael Franzese for breaking that down. If you guys want the source, this is part 2 of exposing the music. Let me say that again. This is part 2 of exposing the music industry one day at a time. You guys really supported part one, so hopefully you support part two by smashing that like button. We're gonna have a third video. I'm about to interview with MG the Future right now to talk about the dark capital side of the music industry. Capital meaning the money and the funding for the music industry. Hopefully you have a better awareness and you can understand that the results you were getting, it's not that you're bad, it's that everybody else was cheating. Okay, so hopefully you can see that by now. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new. Peace.